Welcome back to Music Appreciation. Today we begin Module 9, which is Expression, and we'll start with 9.1, which is Lyrics. So all of today will be about lyrics. And let's take a quick look at what we're going to do in the lesson today, and then we'll listen to some music and think about the lyrics. So today we'll begin with a discussion of lyric elements. And we'll listen to this song On the Radio by Regina Spektor, and we'll be analyzing the lyrics for that song. Then we'll talk about syllables and rhyme, and then rhyme scheme, which is basically the form of a rhyme. And then we'll just do a little bit with some poetic devices like assonance, alliteration, and poetic consonants, simile, metaphor. And we'll end with some discussion of some more interesting songs. So let's go ahead and get started. So we've been spending this whole semester listening to music that has lyrics, and finally we get a chance to talk about it. So normally I would start thinking about lyrics by just discussing with you your thoughts of what goes into lyrics, and how they relate to poetry, etc. So if we can start by just thinking about lyrics and poetry. So obviously poetry is words without music. In fact, one of the origins of music is from ancient Greek poetry, where there was a long tradition of performing poetry, and they started to mark musical symbols for notes above the poetry. And so some of the earliest music notation, or at least the music notation that still survives from earliest, is ancient Greek poetry that has some musical notes above. So are lyrics the same as poetry, is how I would start. If we think about this question, I would say that they're not the same thing. So lyrics specifically refer to those words that are sung. So what's the difference between lyrics and poetry? I would say that poetry is meant to work as an art form, either reading it or performing it or having someone perform it, hearing the words without music. So lyrics specifically have to be music. They have to be attached to music to be lyrics. But does that mean that reading the lyrics for a song, would that make a good poem? Would it work on its own without the music? I'd be curious to hear from you all. I think that the answer that I would come up with is that it doesn't necessarily work as poetry, nor does poetry necessarily work as lyrics, but it's possible that the two could work. If we think about some of the great lyricists that we admire, it's possible that just sitting down and reading their words without hearing the music at all could be a satisfying experience. But I can think of other cases in which the lyrics work perfectly for the song, but they wouldn't really make sense as a poem because probably they're too short as a poem, and the speed at which you would read them as a poem is different. One of the obvious things about the way music unfolds in time is we stretch out words. So a word might last 5 seconds in a song, whereas if we just say the word, it lasts less than half of a second. So that's kind of a difference, I think. And similarly, poetry as lyrics could work, but it's pretty rare that I think it really works as well. Classically, composers will set poems to music. So they'll take a poem by Robert Frost or Lord Byron or something, and then they'll put notes to it and set it to music. And that can work, but again, I would argue that the poetry is laid out in a way to work visually and as it's spoken, not necessarily as lyrics. Feel free to disagree with me. So what elements are involved in lyrics? What things unfold in lyrics in a song? Often there's rhyme. There is a character or a narrator. In poetry, we refer to the narrator of the poem as the person who's telling the story. i.e., if I were to start singing a song, you wouldn't necessarily assume that I am the character that is saying these words. So similarly, we have a narrator in songs, possibly giving some distance from the songwriter to the character of the story. So rhyme, character, narrator. Lyrics have a point of view, so they have, it's written from a dog's point of view, or it's written from yourself at two different ages, or it's written from someone you love. Point of view. Sometimes songs are written from multiple points of view. In fact, older traditional songs, like Willie O. Winsbury that I sang at one point, switches narrators, so it switches from different characters' perspectives throughout the song. Lyrics also have a style of language. So, if you listen to a song, you'll hear they're either using slang, they're being explicit, or they're being family friendly. Sometimes lyrics are really direct and to the point. Sometimes they're kind of like how we speak, but other times they're not at all like how we speak and they're more poetic. So it's something to pay attention to, sort of the style of language. And then lyrics also involve their own form, which of course relates to the musical form that we looked at in Module 7, but the lyrics themselves may also have a smaller form. We'll get into that with rhyme scheme today. So, what makes good lyrics? Definitely a matter of opinion. Probably just as complex of a question as what makes a good song. But I think that, in my opinion, some of the things that I enjoy in lyrics are catchiness, and by that I don't mean necessarily that it's simple, but that it sticks with me, catchy in that way. I tend to like a consistency of elements, so I was talking about a minute ago the point of view or the style of the language. I happily welcome any style of language, but I like it to be sort of self consistent. So when we go to the third verse, I want to hear kind of a similar point of view that I heard before. I also personally really value kind of uniqueness in lyrics, which is tough to do. What makes an artist's lyrics different than anyone else? Maybe we'll get into some of that today. And then I also just enjoy kind of a personality of a song, where this song is almost like has a life of its own, and the song kind of sees things in a certain way. Almost like lyricists can almost act like comedians do in kind of framing the world for you in a certain way. I think it's important to think about what are some of the things that are your favorite things in lyrics that lyrics can do for you. Some of us enjoy being transported to another place, whereas some people really like lyrics to sound like everyday language. One of the things I personally love in lyrics is when there's a mix of kind of clarity and open-endedness. By that I mean, if I were to have every line in the song make perfect sense and we know exactly what everything's about, I personally wouldn't prefer that quite as much as I would if there's some things left unknown, at least on the first hearing. So I find that having some kind of a twist or a puzzling element or an unknown reference or something that I don't quite understand right away tends to help the song stick with me a little bit more. So I feel that it's interesting how with songs we repeat them over and over again. Even if we just perform a song once, we talked about how important repetition is in form. So if we were to just sing a song one time, we're saying the lyrics to the chorus probably 3 or 4 times. And in that inherent repetition, I think that it's kind of interesting to play with the catchiness of what sticks with you, what kind of twirls around in your head afterward. I also think it's fun to have songs that you understand on a certain level right away, but maybe a year later you finally understand what they really meant or what it was really about. So, last little questions before we get started listening. Do you think that lyrics follow the same systems or rules as the music itself? It's kind of an open ended question, but I would say that in general they could follow the form because the verses and choruses, of course, are affected by the lyrics. The lyrics affect those things inherently, but um, the only other thing I can think of would be how the words themselves might interact with the melody. So certain vowels will sound intense up high, ah versus ooh, things like that. But other than that, the lyrics almost exist kind of in a separate realm, but they need to work together with the music. So the last thing I wanted to just think about before we dive in is what elements of lyrics can we study or describe? So as you think about lyrics, we've studied chords and melodies, forms about the music. What could we study about lyrics? Well, I think there are certain things we can study very well and other things that are left not being as easily described. So we can study the form of the lyrics or the rhyme scheme, how many syllables, which lines rhyme, and the repetition and variation, which is very important in lyrics, the way things come back in different ways. We could study the metaphors and the symbolism to some extent. We could talk about the style of the lyrics and the poetic voice, but a lot of it probably goes without being easily described. So, what we're going to do now is listen to a song by Regina Spektor. It's a simple pop song. It's called On the Radio. And what I want us to do is take notes and think about what you could say about this. And then we'll kind of get into some more ways to describe it. So let's listen together. I will put up the lyrics so you can look at them. And just think about how you could describe what's going on here. I hope you enjoy. hope you enjoyed that song, and I hope that you enjoyed the lyrics too. I think they're quite nice. So I'm going to leave them up here on the screen so you can look at them while we discuss. So right before this, I asked what we can describe about lyrics. So we're going to attempt to do that now. I think one of the first things that comes to mind that we can describe is the rhyme scheme. And that's one of the things I want us to take from today. We all know what rhymes are, but I'm going to go into a little detail about rhyme that isn't normally discussed. And the rhyme scheme is the order of the rhymes. So you could say the rhyme form is just usually called a rhyme scheme. So we're going to look in detail in a minute at each of the rhymes here, but I think first reactions, there's some interesting stuff going on with rhyme. So we see what we could break down as two very long verses, or maybe some of you heard this as four verses with each of these cut in half. But you can see on the lyrics here how long the verses are. For today, let's just think about them as two verses, two long verses. So one thing we could describe is the rhyme scheme and how it's interesting. We'll come back to that in a minute. Another thing I think we could describe about this song in terms of lyrics is the imagery, metaphor, the point of view. What's the point of view of the narrator? What's the way that they see the world? So I think it's kind of interesting in this example because we can see kind of a clear difference between verse 1 and verse 2, and also between the choruses and the verses. But I still think it all fits together rather nicely. I would say that the first verse, we have kind of a dreamlike, imagined place going on, or some imagery that's dreamlike, in my opinion. Starting right away with when we drove our hearse right through that screaming crowd while laughing up a storm. It's interesting how these very kind of like dark words collide with the simple, almost childlike piano playing and song. And I think it's really nice. In my opinion, this isn't, I don't hear this as being like scary that these people are driving a hearse through a screaming crowd. I feel like it's more of an exaggeration, like a tall tale, or even somebody being like kind of sarcastic or hyperbolic. I think that's, captures one of the many things that lyrics can do, where, we all know by looking at our friend's face when they say, oh, it's even worse than that, even worse than when we drove our hearse through that screaming crowd. And we would know, because we know someone, whether they're being serious or not. In this case, of course, we don't know the narrator or the artist personally, but I take this, especially because the way the music sounds, as being not entirely sincere, more like an exaggeration, but also dreamlike, because this is how it works. It feels a little worse than when we drove our hearse right through that screaming crowd. As we move on, she starts talking about styrofoam and worms, and then ends with something more sincere, I think, praying that disease would leave the ones we love and never come again. But I could see all of this as being kind of like a dream or some sort of hyperbolic comparison. So what are the topics and the meaning here? I think this is an interesting case. Like if you look at a few songs and ask yourself, what is this song about? Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it's more open-ended. I tend to personally like when it's kind of open-ended, because I think that, for example, between the two verses, the differences kind of make it so they shed light on each other. In terms of meaning or the topic here, this is how it works. It feels a little worse than when all this crazy stuff happened, is kind of how I hear the first verse. But what's it? This is how it works. It feels a little worse. I like that it's open-ended. I don't know what it is. I wish I could hear from you all and see what you think that's referring to. How what works? What feels a little worse? I wonder if it just maybe means like this is how someone might say this is how it works, as in like this is how things work, or this is how life works, or this is how the world works, or maybe this is how love works. I don't know. So another thing I would point out again is the differences, the relationship between the two verses. So we have this first verse with all this wild imagery and a million ancient bees and styrofoam that's melting and crowds of people. Um, and then the second verse, we have this is how it works. You're young until you're not. You love until you don't. You try until you can't. You laugh until you cry. You cry until you laugh. And everyone must breathe until their dying breath. I like how, in my mind, somehow this does actually fit with the previous one, and I can't really explain how. Maybe it kind of relates to the end of the previous verse, but it's definitely um, it's talking about different things. Now one line leads to the next more clearly. The first verse we're kind of traversing a dreamscape, but in the second verse we have these more kind of like rather deep thoughts that get packed really nicely into just a few words. And I think that's one of the great things that lyrics can do is take something that's really meaningful and make it really short. I also really like this. This is how it works. You peer inside yourself. You take the things you like. You try to love the things you took. There's something really really nice about that. How you look inside yourself and take the things that you like, and then try to love the things you took. It sort of implies like maybe you might sour on what you originally took to be yourself, but you should try to love yourself anyway. And then it says you take that love you made and stick it into someone else's heart. I think that's kind of sweet, talking about being able to love someone by loving yourself. So there's definitely a difference between these two. This one makes more sense, you could say. Um, and Then we could talk about how they both relate to the chorus, which is interesting. So now, having looked at both of those, so then we have the chorus. On the radio, we heard November Rain. That solo's really long, but it's a pretty song. We listened to it twice because the DJ was asleep. The two choruses are, as is normally true with choruses, the same words and the same music. However, there is this one twist. It's very small, but in this verse we have, or in this chorus rather, sorry, on the radio, November Rain, really long, pretty song. Here we have, on the radio, November Rain, that solo's awful long, but it's a good refrain, which is kind of nice. Refrain, of course, means chorus, and you can see how the rhyme scheme changes here. At first we have what in a minute we'll call A, B, C, C, meaning the last two rhyme with each other. And over here we have A, B, C, B. So this one rhymes with rain. Just kind of a nice little twist. But in terms of the content of the lyrics, I feel that if you were to hear this song without ever having heard the chorus, I don't know if you would guess that this is what the chorus is going to be. I think it's fun how these things cast light on each other. I wonder if, in my hearing of this, the on the radio chorus is rather understated, right? It's not loud like a normal chorus. It's pretty simple, just like the rest of the song. It references a song, November Rain. Presumably this is November Rain by Guns N' Roses, which is like a long ballad from 1992 or somewhere in there. And when I hear this, I almost feel like the chorus is sort of being treated like a break from the intensity of this dream and the intensity of introspection and love. And it's just like, then we end up just in a car listening to this song, and it goes on for a long time, and it actually ends up playing twice because the DJ was asleep. So we hear the same song twice, which I think is kind of interesting because in itself that relates to a chorus, which we always hear twice. At least she references a refrain. So I sort of hear this as being, unlike some songs, not the answer to the verses. It doesn't sum up the verses, but rather it's a kind of stepping away from the intensity of life and just listening to a song. Now, that's just my opinion. One of the fun things is, we all have different hearings of the lyrics. Last thing I'll mention about these for the moment is that I think it's just worth noting that the phrase and the title of the song, On the Radio, happens at the beginning of the chorus and at the end of the chorus. So, on the radio, you hear November rain. It starts that way, and then it ends with, because the DJ was asleep on the radio. So I think it's just worth noting that the same phrase happens, but with different music within the chorus. It starts and ends it. That's not altogether that rare, but I just thought it was worth noting. Okay, so now let's look at some elements of lyrics together. So one of the important things we can describe about lyrics is the number of syllables. So a syllable is an individual, what we call a phoneme, or an individual sound as part of a word. As we know, words in sight and spelling don't necessarily equate syllables. So one of the funny things I always think about with syllables is that World Wide Web is 3 syllables, but saying www is 9 syllables. So it's faster to write, but it takes longer to say. So we can analyze a song in terms of the syllables. You wouldn't normally count up every syllable, but if you were writing a song, you might be thinking about, okay, do I want to keep the same number of syllables, or do I want to vary it, and how much would I vary it? So let's look at Regina's song here and just count the syllables. This is how it works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It feels a little worse. So this is feels a little worse is 5, but I'm going to call it 1 plus 5. This 1 is what we call a pickup. So it's right before the measure. It's right before the beat. It feels a little worse. So it's still 6 syllables, but one of them is before the measure. So there's still 5 within the measure, or within the phrase. Same thing here. Then, that should say then. Maybe it is than. Then when we drove our hearse. Same thing. The than is a pickup. Right through that screaming crowd. Same thing here. While laughing up a storm. Same thing. Until we were just bone. So that also is a pickup. It's interesting because it's the first part of until is before the beat. So until we were just bone. So until it got so warm that none of us could sleep. If you, just for the record, if you wanted to write all these as 6, that's totally fine. I'm just thinking about it this way. And all the styrofoam began to melt away. We tried to find some worms to aid in their decay, but none of them were home inside their catacomb. So it's pretty obvious. This all has consistent syllables. It's normal for a song to have relatively... Whoops. Apologies. It's normal for a song to have relatively similar syllables. It helps us to write new words to the same music. I do think it's actually a little bit rare that it's this consistent. And I would almost point to what I was saying about how this has kind of a childlike, like a nursery rhyme feel, or some sort of an ultra simplicity in the music especially, that makes this, I don't know, it strikes me as interesting that it's this consistent. In fact, if we keep going through, we'd find that, if I'm not mistaken, there's only 1 or 2 times where it ever adds an extra syllable. So Yeah, so you can. This is not something you would need to do all the way through a song, but sometimes what you'll see is more of something like the first line of lyrics always has five, the second line has seven or something. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about rhyme. So we all know what rhyme is, but I'd like to just remind us that a rhyme is usually a vowel and consonant pair that happens at the end of two words. So it's when two words share a sound as their ending, like rhyme and time, or design and fine. So just to note, it doesn't matter how many syllables are in the word or what occurs before the last syllable. Um, in fact, it's not necessarily the whole last syllable, but just the very last sound or the last phoneme um, would match or be identical. And usually that's a vowel and a consonant. So, okay, here we go with terms. We've had consonant in terms of music. We've talked about how consonant sounds sound good together. Consonant with a T here is referring to, L's and T's and S's rather than O's and A's of vowels. We know this. In a minute, we're going to have yet another type of consonants, which is poetic consonants. Totally different. So a rhyme is supposed to share those vowel consonant at the end. Sometimes we get something more like they don't exactly have the same ending consonant, but they have the same vowel. Like you might rhyme something that ends with M with something that rhymes with N, like alone and home. We have O in both of them, but different consonants, though N and M are kind of similar, more similar than N and T. And then that leads to what we call near rhymes. The famous example is the nursery rhyme Hickory Dickory Dock. Hickory Dickory Dock, the mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck one, the mouse ran down, Hickory Dickory Dock. Whatever that means. I didn't even know this until I was in college and we were talking about near rhymes, but I didn't even know these two were supposed to rhyme. But apparently, dock rhymes with clock. That's a perfect rhyme. One does not really rhyme with down, but it's close enough. They both have N, and it's not an exact rhyme, but it's a near rhyme because ow and o, or in one, not the same, but close enough. So, yeah, if you can think of any songs that have unique or unusual rhymes, that could be fun to think about. Just a little fun aside here about dialect and rhymes. The song Willie o' Winsbury that I sang, it is centuries old, English and Irish origin, and the version that I like that I put on one of our playlists, you can go look it up, is by the band Ye Vagabonds. They're an Irish band. So obviously they have their Irish pronunciation of the English language is slightly different than ours. But the song begins with, "The king he has been a poor prisoner, and a prisoner long in Spain." Okay, prisoner, Spain. "While Willie of the Winsbury has lain long with his daughter at home." Home rhymes with Spain. Go listen to this song. It's laughable for our pronunciation of English, but deciding whether to do an Irish accent, but you'll hear him rhyme home with Spain. Spain sounds pretty similar to the way we say it, and then "has lain long with his daughter at home." So I just thought that's kind of interesting because, it's the same language, but our dialect makes it so that if I were to perform this with my normal accent, it simply would not rhyme at all. But it does in their performance. Quite fun. You'll hear also the same thing happen on the words stone and nay. Those two rhyme in their version. So just kind of a fun thing to think about. So rhyme scheme, again, is basically the form of a rhyme. So we've used A's and B's and C's twice already. We used them little A's and little B's as a way to label melody, melodic phrases. Then we use big A's and B's to label form. So we also would use little a's and b's to mean rhyme scheme. How would that not get confusing? Well, you would just note whether you were describing the melody or the words. And so, similar as the way we've used them before, we would just put whatever comes first as A. It's not more important, it's just the first one that happened. There's no need for primes and variation like we did before, unless you want to get extra fancy. But this is just a way of us keeping track of the rhymes. In fact, it's almost so clear we don't even need it. But still, I think this is one of the things we can really hold on to about lyrics, that they have a specific rhyme scheme. I think it's worth noting that within a verse of a song, you may have more than one rhyme scheme or more than one group of rhyme schemes. So hickory dickory dock, A, mouse ran up the clock, A, clock struck 1, the mouse ran down. Again, those are supposed to rhyme. Hickory dickory dock. Very simple, but I find it interesting to think about the rhymes that happen most often. The ones that happen probably most often, in my opinion, would be A, B, B. That's basically what this is, and then it comes back to A. Or A, B, A, B. So we can call them couplets or quatrains. We're not really going to get too far into the poetic terms for the most part, but A, B, B, or A, B, A, B. And the A, B, A, B one often also occurs as A, B, C, B. This is very, very common, where you have lines 2 and 4 rhyming, and lines 1 and 3 do not rhyme. That's very common as well. So if we were to label on the radio and look at that, this is how it would start. This is how it works. It feels a little worse than when we drove our hearse into that screaming crowd. So that, it's not necessarily broken up into 4 lines always, but in this case, the music turns around there. So we kind of hear this as a 4-line phrase. We would expect new words, but with a rhyme scheme of A, B to happen next. And we don't get that. So this is how it works. It feels a little worse than when we drove our hearse into that screaming crowd, while laughing up a storm until we were just bone. 2 new endings. Until it got so warm that none of us could sleep. So it's almost like the second 4, C, D, C, E, just go completely away from this more predictable A, B. But we do have C and C, which is unusual because if there's 2 out of 4 that rhyme, usually they're the numbers 2 and 4, not 1 and 3. But again, even though this is strange, you would still expect it to repeat. We kind of expect that without even ever thinking about it. We expect consistency. So it goes on, and we could keep going on with D, but my gut told me that we should restart the lettering halfway through this verse, because my idea is that foam is not really intended to rhyme with bone. Maybe it is. Maybe it's both. But I would say that we're kind of in new territory. So you could certainly label it this other way if you want. So here we go. Here's kind of the second half. And all the styrofoam began to melt away. We tried to find some worms to aid in their decay. Okay, so now we have A, B, C, B. Very common, but not what happened here. It's not really even remotely the same as those rhyme schemes. But none of them were home inside the catacomb. So here, it looks like I've made a little mistake. Apologies. You can help me. So second half. And all the styrofoam began to melt away. We tried to find some worms to aid in their decay, but none of them were home, is A. Inside the catacomb, a million ancient bees, sorry, this should be D, because it's a new ending, began to sting our knees. While we were on our knees, which is actually the same word, praying that disease would leave the ones we love and never come again. Just kind of fun. We have 4 in a row that end with E's. But they're not really a group of four. They're kind of just in the middle of this whole mass. And we had A, B, C, B, and then we had two A's, four D's, and then an E and an F. Okay, so this kind of sums up what I think is interesting about this song, or one of the things, which is that it's not random endings of words. That would look different, right? Then we'd be E, F, G, H, A, B, C, K, L, M, N. We have a lot of rhymes, a ton of rhymes, a bunch in a row, but the weird thing is how there's no real consistent form to it. So I'll ask you, do you think that the second verse is going to follow this scheme? Probably not, right? And it doesn't. It does a similar thing in that it has a lot of rhymes. We can pull it back up here if you want to see. This is how it works. You're young until you're not. You love until you don't. You try until you can't. That's interesting because not, don't, and can't are all negating contractions, but they don't actually rhyme. They just have a similar ending, or at least they're not a full rhyme because the vowels are different. You laugh until you cry until you laugh. Everyone must breathe until their dying breath. It's almost like not much at all rhymes in there, except maybe laugh and breath. Close. This is how it works. You peer inside yourself. You take the things you like. You try to love the things you took. You take that love you made. You stick it into someone else's heart, pumping someone else's blood. Not much rhyming here. Walking arm in arm, you hope it don't get harmed. Clear rhyme. But even if it does, you'll just do it all again, which again happened at the end of the other verse. Point is, I think this is a rare and interesting case where we are getting a lot of rhymes, especially in the first verse, but without the consistency of a predictable pattern. So no rhyme scheme. No predictable rhyme scheme in this song. You could say that there is a rhyme scheme. It's just whatever all that was that we wrote out. Last little thing about rhyming, there's this fun thing called a rhyming dictionary. They exist online and in print, and it's not really a dictionary, but you can look up any word and then it just has a list of words that rhyme with it, which is pretty fun. So if you're stuck on a rhyme, maybe give that a try. All right, so we're just going to talk briefly about a few poetic elements, and these first couple are similar to rhyme, but not exactly a rhyme. So assonance is the word for when we share a repeated vowel sound within a line. So remember that the rhyme is the ending vowel and consonant, and that usually is between two lines of text. Assonance can occur within one line, and it is like this: Joe groans so he won't go home alone. This is a lot of O. That's the idea. So it's a repeated sound. So it doesn't create a rhyme necessarily, or you could say all these words rhyme, or some of them do, but it's not the ends of lines. It's all happening in a row. Alliteration is where you have repeated initial consonants. So instead of vowels, like in assonance, you have alliteration, which is like Roy ran in the raging rain. I slipped slyly in the slow, slippery sled. Her brown braid brushed the bridge of her brow. Wait, whispered Wendy, her gaze wandering wistfully. So it's a shared consonant, and specifically the initial consonant, so the beginning of a word. Note how that's different than a rhyme, which deals with the end of the word and doesn't care at all about the beginning of a word. So these don't necessarily happen in songs, but when they do, it kind of gives us a sort of micro form of, or a little, you might say, repeating that's happening within one line. Here we go, poetic consonants. I wish this wasn't the same word as our musical thing, but this is what it's called in poetry, is consonants. Consonants, believe it or not, is repeated consonants, but not necessarily at the beginning of the word. So alliteration is the initial consonant of a word. Consonance is the repeated consonant that can happen at the beginning or ending of a word. So technically, alliteration is one type of consonants because alliteration is repeated consonants. But poetic consonants could also involve things like this. The lock stuck quickly, so Mark called a locksmith. Just note how the k sound happens at the beginning, middle, and end. It's not just at the beginning. There's kind of a different feel than her brown braid brushed the bridge of her brow, where it's very clearly at the beginning of the words. So those are things, if you find them in lyrics, probably they were on purpose. But rhymes are sort of the bread and butter of lyrics, right? Rhymes are not required, but they probably happen, I would say, in 80-90% of songs. Finally, things that you probably know from some English class or poetry or something. Simile and metaphor. So just to remind us that a simile is a poetic comparison using like or as, where you say, life is like a box of chocolates. That's a simile. Metaphor, similar, but you replace something, or you put something without saying it's like this. You just say that it is that. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. So it's not saying hope is like something with feathers. It's saying hope is a thing with feathers, so it kind of implies a bird, right? But it's saying hope is the bird. Same means to an end, though. There's something called extended metaphor, which is like where your entire song would be a metaphor for something else, or a whole novel could be a metaphor for something that it's not. So I'm just going to pause for a second, and then we'll finish up with some listening and discussion of some other lyrics. So to finish up, we're just going to listen to a few things, and I'll put the lyrics up there. And in lieu of me giving my opinions, I hope you just enjoy them, and we'll kind of send off this lesson open-ended, and maybe you'll get some ideas either for songs that you're interested in studying, the lyrics for the homework or for the final project, or maybe if you're writing a song, maybe this will give you some ideas. So I hope you enjoy. The first example is Diane Cluck's The Turnaround Road, which I think is just a great song and great lyrics. And the next one is a Paul Simon song called Graceland, but there's an abbreviated version that's covered by the Swedish singer-songwriter who goes by The Tallest Man on Earth. So you've got Diane Cluck, The Turnaround Road, and then Paul Simon's Graceland, played by The Tallest Man on Earth. An optional one that I won't play, but I think has great lyrics if you want to study them, is Mr. Tambourine Man by Bob Dylan. So that's all from me. I hope you enjoy listening to these last examples and seeing the lyrics. And we'll see you next time.
Cars, three-point turns, make pentagrams in the dirt at the end of the road. Where I sit in the morning, the weeks have been hazy, but something is changing. I watch the sun convince the weakest cloud to let it through. It said I would have gone crooked, but for you. There's a sticky orange vine here, and it grows over everything. I don't know what they call it. I call it Darling Creeper. I give names to the flora and to the fauna, most descriptive of their character to me. There's snakes I have been warned about. There's rattlers in this roundabout. They come in from the chaparral. They crummy on the gravel now, but I like it when I'm sitting with things around me moving. It may look like I'm brooding, like I'm getting not much done, but oh, there is a cure here. The light is very pure here. I'm gathering my strength like a consumptive in the sun, and I would have gone crooked but for you, but for you. I would have gone crooked but for you. I would have gone crooked but for you, but for you. I would have gone crooked. Some Zen artist left his red rock garden in the turnaround road where I sit in the morning. It gets kicked around the cul-de-sac by those who go in double back, as if there is no thoroughfare in absence of a beaten track. And the red ants are moving with their sick and withered comrades. They carry the bodies of the withered in their mouths because it is no big deal. Hey, what else is there to do but set your sight on something and to pull your tangles through? Oh, I would have gone crooked but for you, but for you. I would have gone crooked but for you. I would have gone crooked but for you, but for you. I would have gone crooked, and I don't think I even knew before now. Hey, I feel steady and I feel good, light and emptied of last night's food. There's a mountain ahead when I'm ready to go up from the edge of the turnaround road. Cars, three-point turns, like mandalas in the dirt at the end of the road where I sit in the morning. The weeks have been hazy, but something is changing. I watch the sun convince the smallest cloud to let it through. It said I would have gone crooked but for you. I would have gone crooked but for you.
The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. I am following the river down the highway to the cradle of the Civil War. I'm going to Graceland, Memphis, Tennessee. I'm going to Graceland. She comes back to tell me she's gone, as if I didn't know that, as if I didn't know my own bed, as if I never noticed the way she brushes her hair from her forehead. She said, losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees you're blown apart. Everybody feels the wind blow. I'm going to Graceland, Memphis, Tennessee. I'm going to Graceland. And there's a girl in New York City, she calls herself the human trampoline. And sometimes when I'm falling, stumbling, tumbling in turmoil, I say, whoa, is this what you mean? She says we're bouncing into Graceland. I see losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees you're blown apart. Everybody feels the wind blow. I'm gonna Graceland, Memphis, Tennessee. I'm gonna Graceland.